Joining us now is the Treasurer, Josh Frydenberg. Treasurer, thanks very much for your time. Let's start with the question that's been asked of you and of the Prime Minister repeatedly in this campaign, and many of us don't know why you just don't put a figure on it. What is the tax relief that you're planning for income earners over $180,000 a year?
Well, we have set out very clearly in the budget the cost of our $158 billion tax package, and let me take you through it very clearly. Firstly, Kieran, we're not cutting the top rate of marginal rate of tax. That's very clear. We're not changing the top rate of marginal tax.
But there is still tax relief for the highest income earners, isn't there?
The second point is that what we are doing is we're creating one big bracket between $45,000 and $200,000 so that people are not subject to bracket creep, and I think that is really important. This is going to cost $95 billion. That is set out in the budget papers. But the other key point is that the top 5% of taxpayers, which roughly equates to the number of people who are on the top rate of tax, they will pay more as a proportion of the overall.
You're still not putting a figure on it, are you? You're still not putting a
Well, the only people that put a figure on it are the Australia Institute, and I note that there are...
Yeah, well, why don't you counter them if you disagree with them? Is it more than that? Is it more than 77?
The point is, that is a Labor-aligned institute with people on its board like the Secretary of the Australian Manufacturers Workers Union. This is an organisation that has promoted death taxes. Okay. This is not an organisation that we take credibly.
Treasurer, when you say the highest income earners and this whole tax relief plan, that $95 billion figure that you just talked about, is that what Treasury has modelled? That by cutting the highest, cutting tax, income tax for the highest income earners, is that what it costs the budget?
What it costs the budget is $95 billion to reduce the rate of tax from 32.5 to 30 cents in the dollar for those who are earning between $45,000 and $200,000. It's roughly 9 million taxpayers and about 70% of the number of taxpayers across the economy.
So you still haven't given us a figure for those earning upwards of 180. Why is that?
Well, I think that the key thing is, and it's in the budget papers, is that there is the cost of the tax cut, which is $95 billion, but also there is the impact it has on our progressive tax system. And as I explained to you, Kieran, the top 5% of taxpayers under our plan actually have a greater share of the overall burden. And somebody who's earning $200,000 will pay 10 times as much tax under our plan as someone who is paying $45,000. So really, the debate here is about the coalition cutting taxes, focusing on low and middle income earners, and the Labor Party wanting to increase taxes. And I take you back to that run-in that Bill Shorten had in Gladstone with the worker. And the worker put to him that people were working overtime, that their incomes could be up to $250,000. What were you doing for us? And Bill Shorten didn't come clean with that worker, did not tell him that he was proposing to lift the highest rate of marginal tax by 2 percentage points.
Treasurer, you've given us a figure of $95 billion this morning for part of your plan. Why is it so difficult for you to give us the figure that we're asking for?
Well, I can give you all the figures, which is $158 billion.
But you know what we're talking about.
But $95 billion is for that one part, 32.5 down to 30. Then you've got $48 billion, which is to lift the threshold from $41,000 to $45,000. And then you've got $15 billion, which is the low and middle income tax offset, which will see people who are earning up to $126,000 get up to $1,080 in their pocket in just 10 weeks' time. The fact is, the coalition is reducing people's taxes, $158 billion in this budget and $144 billion in last year's budget. Bill Shorten is hitting them with $387 billion of taxes, and as you can see from the polls, this is starting to bite. People can now see that Bill Shorten and the Labor Party mean higher taxes for them.
When you look at their approach, the fair go tax transfer, that's how it is in the front page of The Australian. It was the fair go behind Shorten yesterday. It's very much a wealth redistribution approach. He won't, describe it as such, but that's what it is. Do you feel that that's your window of opportunity where he says, we're not going to help the rich, we're going to tax the rich and give to the poor, a modern-day Robin Hood approach?
Well, you point to the commentary in the papers today, one of the key points they made is that Labor has no growth story for the economy. It is all about redistributing the pie, whereas what we set out in the budget was our three-step plan for growing the pie, namely the fiscal story and bringing the budget back into surplus for the first time in more than a decade. The second point was about tax cuts, new apprentices, $100 billion on infrastructure. And the third part was about guaranteeing the essential services and strengthening our economy and our society as a result.
But do you see Labor having a plan for aspirational workers? But for aspirational workers.
Well, I'm really
because they're saying in terms of low-income workers, they will support them.
Well, I'm really pleased you raised that term aspiration, because not only did Tanya Plibersek not know what it means, but Paul Keating has actually said that the Labor Party of today, under Bill Shorten, has failed to speak aspirationally to Australians. And he was very critical, for example, of their tax policies in increasing the top marginal rate. So the Labor Party do not speak to people who want to invest in property, who want to invest in shares, who want to save prudently for their retirement. We do, and that's why we're lowering people's taxes and Labor is increasing them.
Treasurer, two policies that were flagged yesterday by Bill Shorten. This was price controls on childcare fees and also clamping down on multinationals by zeroing in on what was described as dodgy royalties. Would you do the same in those two instances?
Well, let me take you through the multinational tax agenda, because we've been able to get more than $7 billion of tax revenue.
Sure, but is this something you've missed
through
about
changes?
clamping down on dodgy royalties? And what about childcare price controls?
Well, we think that our measures, which the Labor Party voted against on multinational tax, actually had the right impact. We continue to work internationally through the G20 to strengthen the rules globally with country-by-country reporting and changes in relation to transfer pricing and a whole series of other things that we're doing. But as Scott Morrison pointed out in the Sky debate, Bill Shorten is proposing to get $2 billion from multinationals, whereas he's proposing to hit retirees with a $57 billion tax. Now, when it comes to childcare and your other question, what we saw in the most recent CPI data was that the cost of childcare had come down by 9% for families. We'd put more than $2.5 billion extra into childcare so that a family on $80,000 with two kids under the age of 6 will be up to $8,000 a year better off. We've done all of that, Laura, without increasing taxes.
Look at the franking dividend issue, because the Australian, its analysis today has found that 9 in 10 recipients of the credit, the franking credit, is in a Liberal seat. So 9 out of 10 recipients are in Liberal seats. Is this an issue where you're not really talking to swing voters? Or is this the Liberal base issue that you're defending in terms of franking credits?
Well, again, you've got to look at the Labor Party's history on this. They've supported for 2 decades this notion of fully franked dividends and cash refunds. In fact, they took it to the 98 election and Simon Crean openly said how it would help lower income earners and retirees. This is now a desperate cash grab by the Labor Party.
Recipients are in Liberal. If we just talk in terms of the politics here, because we've looked at...
They're in all seats. I've actually seen...
But 9 out of 10 are in Liberal seats.
Well, I've seen numbers that show that they're in all seats because the vast majority of these people have a taxable income of less than $37,000. So they're not necessarily wealthy people. They've based their preparation for their retirement plans on the rules that they expected to continue.
Treasurer, yesterday you said anyone can run for Parliament if they're not in jail. That being said, I guess Clive Palmer does meet that test. But do you rule out horse trading with Clive Palmer in any circumstances on the other side of an election? And pre-polls have opened, they're 3 weeks. Do you think they're too long?
Yeah, I do feel like pre-poll could be a bit a bit shorter, but I mean, again, that's not a decision for me. That is a decision for the AEC and for our political leaders on the other side of an election, because I note that the state elections, for example, in Victoria recently had it for 2 weeks. As for Clive Palmer, the Labor Party tried to do a deal with him. They were obviously unsuccessful, but they're still preferencing Clive Palmer and 85 seats ahead of the coalition.
I want to ask you finally about a very concerning trend that we've seen in this campaign, the anti-Semitic attacks that we've seen on your advertising. Julian Leeser, we've seen a report on one of his billboards. It's the
Islamophobia.
It's very upsetting,
the
trend that we're seeing here.
Look, it is of concern, and the debates become more coarse, more toxic. It's incumbent on all of us to speak out against that. But at the same time, there are a lot of good people out there, and I've had a lot of messages of support since my posters were daubed with swastikas, because I think anyone who is fair-minded and decent, regardless of their political persuasion, knows that is a no-go zone in our politics.
You've been encouraged by that positive reaction?
Absolutely.
Well, that's it. That's good, given, you know, these sorts of things.
Across the political divide.
Oh, that's good.
And, you know, I noticed Chris Bowen put out a nice public message when it happened, saying that was not acceptable. And my other colleagues on, you know, both Liberal and Labor have said the same.
Yeah, well, let's hope that when we call it out, it does have an impact. Josh Frydenberg, Treasurer, thanks so much. A busy day for you ahead of the Treasurer's debate later today, and we'll talk to you soon.
Looking forward to it.
A quick break, back in just a moment.